Welcome viewers to yet another interview of winningbusiness.com, where we talk about winning ideas into winning entrepreneurship. Today we have with us Mr. Akhil Shahani from the Shahani Group. Yes, sir.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm fine, sir. So basically we would start this interview episode with your early beginnings from 1950. Can you throw some light?
Well, of course, I was born way after 1950. So I'll talk about the history of the Shahani Group. If you look at it, it really goes back almost 100 years. Right from the founder of the group, who was Akhil Shahani. Akhil Shahani was the principal of one of the top colleges in Sindh before partition, and he had 4 sons, right? One of them being my grandfather. But interestingly, the other 3 sons were all into education. They were either teachers or they were educational book publishers. Some wrote some books, and in fact, one of my granduncles, his books are still available. The English to Hindi translation books are still available in the library of the Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, and available on Amazon. So we've had a long history of education. But of course, after partition, when my grandfather came down, he was in fact the youngest and the least educated among the 3 brothers. He said, okay, one of the things that he realized is that to make sure that the Sindhi refugees who came down along with him build up their, let's say, their careers and get themselves to be financially independent, he said the first thing we need to do is make sure that they have education. So he, along with a couple of other founders, helped to found what is now called the Hyderabad Sindh Collegiate Board, where now has 24 colleges around Bombay, some of the well-known ones. But the thing is that he always had that mindset for education, and even today my family is still on that board. However, we always looked at education from the charitable point of view, and when you look at education from the charitable point of view, which is good, but you tend to have government control, a lot of government university controls. You can't really do a lot to make kids employable, and I'm sure I'll address that when we later in the interview. But essentially, the family business, the family has always been in education from the non-profit point of view for the last 100 years. But of course, it's only recently we started looking at education more from the viewpoint as a business or as a private enterprise versus as a purely charitable initiative.
So over so many years or decades of your family being in education sector,
Right.
with respect to you, what do you think were the biggest challenges that the family faced?
Well, again, it's I think as with any growing business, any growing enterprise, you have the standard things. Like, for example, especially when you're in the charitable sector, your biggest problem, of course, is raising donations, because obviously you can't get private equity, and of course in those days there was no concept of private equity in the 1950s. So my grandfather, one of the key things that he did was go after a lot of the other large Sindhi families, the philanthropic families, and said, look, why don't you come in and help to build the education system for the Sindhi community in those days, and of course we went beyond that. But donate and, let's say, name a college after your father, your grandfather, or your brother, which is why if you look at the way colleges in India have grown, most of them are named after some obscure saint or some obscure family. But ultimately, most of the time, because the family is willing to put the initial money to donate, that gives a seed funding for your college. So most of your capital investment is covered by that seed funding. And then once you have students, then operationally you are covered that way. So what is interesting is that when we started the very first college in 1950, which is National College, the Principal Kundani had to pawn his wife's jewelry to get the first plot of land in Bandra. That time Bandra was like a little jungle, right? But today, right from that, totally self-driven, we now have these 24 institutions that we're on the board of. But again, in all cases, keeping track of making sure that we have enough money coming in because student fees are limited, making sure that we have enough talented faculty, because as you know, in India, a lot of people find teaching to be not the top profession that they would aspire for. So very often the people who come in as teachers, interestingly, in fact, even if they are very talented or very, very proactive when they start, because of government control and because of focusing on just teaching to the textbook, they tend to get more and more cynical, and they tend to come down and just teach to the textbook and focus on the exams. So I think, which is the true challenges of most organizations, getting funding, getting talent, and making sure that you're able to keep operations going. And there's no shortage of students, that's for sure.
So if the viewers have to understand the group, the family,
Right.
can you just tell us about all the institutes that the family is involved with?
Okay. So as I said, let me clarify. So the HSNC board, we are on the charitable board, right? And there are other families on that board. So we don't control it per se. But when you look at the Shahani group in terms of, let's say, the private college group we run, we are set up, okay, so let me take a step back there, right? One thing we realized is that, and again, maybe I could talk a bit about why we chose to get into private education versus continuing with what we're doing. What we realized is that I've been working with the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, for a very long time, and their education task force. And one of the things, and as you know very well, is that most CEOs today, they don't have a problem with how the economy is going. Their biggest problem is how to get talent. That is huge. They say that our problem is today is that where can I find these talented kids who will have the job-ready skills to make sure they can work well in our companies. And on the other side, you have a whole host of hundreds and thousands of kids who are graduating from college who want to work, but they don't have the skills to work. So you have a lot of jobs looking for talent, and you have a lot of kids looking for jobs, but there's no match. So what we said is that why don't we try to create employable kids, right? And we did a lot of research. In fact, me and our group, we did a lot of research with the CEOs. We spoke to almost around 150 recruiters and top management and said, you tell us what you want to make someone employable. When you say you want someone to be employable, what does that mean? And most of them came down to a lot of interesting points of view. They said that really what we want, I mean, of course, we want someone with industry skills. We want someone with that functional knowledge. However, what we really want are 3 or 4 things. One is we want a guy who has a proactive attitude. That means that when I get the person, he will learn on the job. He will keep on wanting to learn because all the theory that you teach him is going to be irrelevant in the job. Even what we teach him on the job is going to be irrelevant in 2 years' time. So the person has to have the willingness to learn all the time. Second thing is that very often in colleges or in schools, you're used to working by yourself because you write exams, you mug yourself. If you collaborate with someone else, that's called cheating. However, in the real world of work, you have to work in teams. You have to collaborate with others. So therefore, they want someone who can work well in teams. The third thing, of course, is communication skills, very important. And the fourth thing, which is a little high end, is ability to think critically. That means that take a complex problem and break it up into smaller components and think on the job. So 4 components. So we said is that, okay, if that's what we want, why can't we build those kids in our colleges? So we went back to the principals of our colleges and we said, look, this is what industry wants. You want to get your kids to get these jobs. Can't you build these sort of kids? Unfortunately, me trying to get our academic principals to understand what industry wanted was me trying to explain to a vegetarian why butter chicken tastes so good. It's just a vegetarian has no first-hand knowledge of eating non-veg. Same way, the academic principals had never worked in industry, so therefore they could understand the nuance of what had to be done. So what we said is that instead of us trying to change an established system that's totally ingrained, let's build our first college right from the ground up as to making people employable. That means we take every conventional idea of education, throw it out of the window and say that if our end goal is to create employable graduates, let's work backwards and make them employable. And so we came up with a lot of innovations that no other college that we know is doing in India, forget about Asia. For example, a classic thing is that if you take the old Peter Drucker phrase, what can be measured can be managed, we said let's first start with a measure of employability. So when we identify 6 parameters of employability, which I spoke to you for, we start measuring students on how employable they are. That means that when they enter the first semester of our course, they will actually be measured on something called a corporate readiness score. How ready are you for the corporate world? And every semester they are measured as to how they progress. Secondly, it's not just enough to measure them, you also have to build them up on these parameters of team working, critical thinking, being a go-getter. And a lot of that is based on things like getting mentored by industry. So we have a lot of industry people coming to teach our students, and they also mentor them one-to-one, because only with mentoring does a student get to reflect on their own development and actually understand what they want to be in life. Because very often there are too many students who just say, I want to be a lawyer without actually understanding what it means to be a lawyer, or vice versa, right? So that's the second thing. The third thing is that getting them involved in a lot of extracurricular projects and activities, even non-profit work, which allow them to build up their capabilities outside the raw curriculum. Because what you would be called mastery experiences. A mastery experience means that if you give them a chance to actually to master a certain skill set through their own efforts, they start getting more confidence on their own ability to do well. So therefore that builds up that go-getter attitude. Stuff like this, a regular college would have to just totally destroy what they do and adopt it. So we said that let's start with that. So we started with our first business school way back in 2011, and we partnered with a British university to offer their MBAs. That allowed us a lot more flexibility. And we started with scaling up students from there. And then we said, now that the model works, after the first 3 years, we didn't even have our own campus. We said that let's work with somebody else's campus to start making sure our costs are low before we build it up. Once we were sure that our education model worked, we then raised external funding, and then we started a media school. Now we moved into other areas, setting up a film school, setting up a school of real estate, and adding more colleges. But the core of our education system is still building up the employability capabilities of a student along with the functional knowledge. So that's...
Okay. So what are your thoughts sir, on Indian education system?
Well, I think, okay, there are two things. Let's look at it this way. I think the starting point is that, and I think both of us are old enough to remember India before 1991 liberation, right? So Indian economy before the 1991 was very controlled. It was very dominated by the government. There was a lot of demand. If you remember, to get, let's say, to buy a car, you had to wait for 6 months to get a very crappy car. I mean, and the incumbents were very happy selling you that crappy car because they didn't have to make an effort to move, right? Now, if you look at the Indian education system today, after almost more than 25 years of liberalization, India's education system is still one of the most regulated. And this is when you look at the background that there's a huge skill shortage in India. In fact, there's a recent report by, I think, the World Economic Forum in India that said, saying that there'll be a requirement of 220 million skilled workers in India by 2030, right? What is interesting is that this is not just factory workers. This is people who will work in companies like ours, people who work in banks, people who work in other industries. There is no way to train these guys. Conversely, you have almost 400 million Indians moving into the job market over the next decade. And again, most of them don't have these skills. So what you have is that a huge demand by industry for talent. You have a huge need for these young kids to get trained to join industries. Unfortunately, because of a lot of government control, you can't provide that quality education. So you have a large number of kids who are entering higher education colleges with and getting a degree like a BCom or BA, which doesn't cost much, but has no value to industry. Then they start finding these private education providers to come up with training. So you have a lot of these. You take, let's say, an NIT or like other organizations that train people in those job skills. But because there's such a huge demand, there's a requirement for a lot more players to come in. So even with us, even no matter how large we grow, we probably can't deal with more than, let's say, even 10 lakh, 20 lakh kids, which is a small drop in the ocean. So there's a huge need to liberalize the Indian education industry, to allow a lot of private players to come in. And to allow private players to come in, you have to also allow them to make a profit. That is different from profiteering. Doesn't mean that let's say your cost is 10 and you charge 100. If your cost is 10, you charge 12. Make a decent profit, a decent return. But don't disallow that profit, because that's the only way to allow independent entrepreneurs to come in and to scale up. So the Indian education system is huge. I've got a huge amount of optimism for the growth of the Indian education system. It's just that if some of these shackles are loosened a bit, we have a lot more potential.
And what are your thoughts on affordable education?
I think I think this is interesting, right? So when you look at, and let's talk about affordable schools, that's an easy thing to do. What is interesting, there's a recent, again, another survey that came out, and they said that look at the number of affordable schools versus, let's say, government and private schools. Interestingly, in the affordable school segment, 70% of the kids who get into affordable education get into private affordable schools, those so-called budget schools, not government schools. That means that instead of actually parents saying, instead of us paying zero cost for education, which is nothing great, I'm going to pay a couple of $100 a month to get my kid into a good school. Because education is one thing, as a parent, like no matter all of us, we would never compromise on our kids' education. You will try your best to make sure your kid gets the best education within what you can do. You may borrow money, you may cut down your own personal costs, your own, let's say your own entertainment, just to get your kid the best education within your frame. Now, when you look at India, the thing is that what limits affordable education is the lack of players. Same way like you look at the Indian economy in the 1980s, where there were fewer players in all industrial sectors, so therefore the cost of what you were buying was high relative to what you were earning, right? When the economy opened up, a lot more players came in and suddenly the overall costs started coming down. You look at today, what you're paying for, let's say, clothes in India is much less compared in purchasing power parity terms than what you were paying, let's say, 20 years ago. So if you want to get more affordable education in India, you need to open up the market to a lot more private players to come in. Immediately costs start going down because suddenly there's competition. So that means a medical college can't charge you 90 lakhs to a crore for a seat when there are 10 other medical colleges offering the same seat. Therefore, immediately the cost goes down. So the concept of profiteering starts coming down and education becomes more affordable the more there's competition.
Very interesting, sir. So talking about your current organization, where you have introduced 4 institutes since 2011. Can you just throw some highlight? What is the position right now
of the institutes? Well, right now, as I said, we have 4 locations, but we are expanding very rapidly because our key model is, and a couple of few points, right? And is that we have set ourselves up as a private company. That means that it allows us to get private equity investment easily and give exits to a lot of investors. That unlike a lot of other trust-based colleges, like let's say you take some of the larger groups like Amity and all, they are based out as, they're set up as trusts. So therefore, investors can't put in their money or exit that easily. So we said as a starting point, we need to have 2 or 3 components. One is a private for-profit structure that allows easy entry and exit of investors. Secondly, an asset-light model, because if you start buying infrastructure, you'll end up taking too much debt in the company, doesn't make sense. The third thing is having a technology platform that allows you to scale. So where we are today is that currently we're offering around 14 different programs through our various colleges in leased buildings. What we are doing is that we recently created a technology platform where we're now transferring our programs onto that technology platform. It's a mobile-based platform. So that means that the student learns the content online. However, if they want to, let's say, get the degree or diploma, they need to come off for the offline classes. So the classic case would be, it's called what you would call blended learning. That means that you learn the theory online, but you get the building up of the attitude and skills and employability capability through offline education, through seminars, through workshops, through experiential learning. And that gives you a large program. So let's say a full diploma could be taught, out of which maybe 80 hours online, plus around another 80 hours offline, and you get 160 hours of teaching. That also, online-offline capability allows us to scale up into other cities very quickly, because we're now in the process of expanding to Ahmedabad and to Pune. Because when I go to Ahmedabad, I have my online content already. So all I need to do is hire a location, get a local facilitator, a trainer, have the online content and teach the same course in Ahmedabad that I'm teaching in Bombay with standardized quality. So what we expect to do in the next 5 years is we're anticipating having around 70 different locations around India, starting with the western region and then moving up across the rest of the country.
So how many students do you have currently?
Well, currently we have around, as I said, since we started, we have around, I think, almost 1,000 plus at this point. But of course, there are different price points. So obviously,
what will be your average price point?
So my top price point is 10 lakh MBA. My lowest price point would be a 60,000 rupee course in banking, right? But average, I would say my price point would be around 2.5 lakhs, give or take, across the board.
And going forward, what will be your growth model?
So our growth model, as I said earlier, is that basically we're going to be using sort of like a semi-franchise model. That means that we will find local partners in each city. The local partner will provide the infrastructure and provide some of the local ground level marketing. What we will do is provide the online content, we will provide the trainers, and more importantly, we provide the job placement. One thing I forgot to mention is that all our courses are driven towards job placement. That means every kid, no matter if they take a short course or a long course, we help them get placed. Because we are training them to be employable and because we have a close relationship with recruiters, our placement records are brilliant across all industries. So that allows us to scale up very rapidly. So our model really, as I said, will be 70 locations, most of them will be franchised, very few will be self-owned.
Okay. So what do you expect could be the crucial challenges in your growth model?
Well, I think for us, I mean, to be honest, getting access to capital is not such a problem because a lot of investors actually have loved our model. They said that this is the sort of thing that really is needed to solve India's employability gap. And so I've not had a problem getting a lot of investors in the impact investment space, interestingly. What my biggest challenge, frankly, is finding the right sort of talent at the senior level, and also making sure that when I scale up into multiple cities, I can provide the same quality of education that I can provide in my hometown of Bombay, right? Because the thing is that even though I've got the online content, I've got access to recruiters, getting the right facilitators to teach in the way that we want them to teach is where we're going to have that bottleneck. But we'll sort that out.
And what is the capital you're looking at?
Well, right now we are in the market to raise around 10 CR. As a growth stage company, we of course are good revenue coming in, and most of my money I need to raise for growth. I mean, operationally we're fine.
And where do you see yourself with respect to PAT and EBITDA next 5 years?
Well, the great okay. So let me paraphrase that by saying that a well-run educational institution today runs on almost a 45 to 50% operating margin, and that has actually been validated by a lot of other higher education institutions around India. You look at some of the big names, I mean, they're just minting money left, right and center, and they're not doing anything great, to be honest. But because the thing is that when you look at students coming in, so let me explain the education industry in terms of, let's say, the hotel industry, right? When you have a hotel which has, let's say, 100 rooms, your profitability is based on how frequently those rooms are occupied. So, for example, like if you end the year with a 60% occupancy rate, you say, wow, I've done a lot, right? Imagine if you ran a hotel where all your rooms are occupied throughout the year. That means that at the beginning of the year, every room is occupied fully by clients, and all your room rent comes at the beginning of the year. So if you're a well-run institution, that means that you have full capacity of all your classroom seats are full. Secondly, all your fees come in the beginning of the year, and then all your costs happen after that. So that means that a lot of the well-run players in India and even globally actually have negative working capital requirements. That means that they will earn, let's say, 100 crores at the beginning of the year, and then all their costs happen and they end the year with, let's say, a 40, 50 crore bottom line. Because, of course, government tax-free. So for us, we see ourselves, the way we projected ourselves, that we hope to have around, I think last thing was around 320 crore top line by 2024, 23.
And margins, EBITDA margins?
Well, we hope to be industry standards, so I'll say 35 to 45%. Because education is sort of industry where your fixed costs are high, your variable costs are very low. So with the same fixed costs, I can actually have a lot more students. I can service 100 students, I can service 200 students, 300 students. As my number of students increases, my costs go down relative to the student.
Because then you also have an online and offline model. So,
correct. So that allows
and a franchisee model. So your fixed cost is predominantly.
Absolutely true.
Very interesting, sir. So that was Akhil Shahani of the Shahani Group. So viewers, stay tuned into winningbusiness.com for more such interviews and anecdotes. Thank you.